All right, so this is the last lesson of Unit 1. We're going to be dividing complex numbers, and we're going to be finding the conjugate. All right, so let's go ahead. Page 19 in your packet. So dividing complex numbers. Now, this is a little bit different than what you're used to doing in division, but it's okay. We're still dealing with the imaginary number, but we're going to get it in simplest form, okay? So the thing that you need to know is it says expressions in simplest form cannot have square roots in the denominator. So we cannot have square roots in the denominator, all right? That's the first thing you need to know. So highlight it, mark it, something. No square roots in the denominator. Some of you have already encountered that just from simplifying imaginary numbers under the square roots when there was fractions and stuff. Because the imaginary unit represents a square root, you must rationalize the denominator to remove the I. So in other words, we cannot have I on the bottom, all right? We need to rationalize it. All right. So we need to rationalize it. So and you can write this down so you have it. So I'm going to multiply, by the same thing. So by the same thing that I have in the denominator, only it's negative. Or if it's negative, it's going to be positive. So I'm going to change the sign. I'm going to multiply by the opposite sign. All right? So the reason I'm doing that is because I cannot leave I in the denominator. This is very important to you, okay? So go ahead and highlight it, underline it, do whatever you got to do. So you're going to have to rationalize it. So to rationalize it, I'm going to multiply by the same thing, just negative. So I have 3 over I. So I'm going to multiply by a negative I. Well, whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by negative I. Now, when I'm multiplying fractions, I'm going to multiply straight across. So I have negative 3I over negative I squared. Now, I squared, we can't have an I squared. Remember our little pattern we have here. Okay? So negative, or I squared is negative 1. So we're going to have negative 3I over negative 1. Now, negative 1 is going to give us a positive 1. So we have 3I over positive 1, which is also a negative 3I. And now we have rationalized that we've solved it. That is our answer for that one. All right, go ahead and turn the page, and we're going to do these two. All right, or the top two. So on the bottom, we have 2I. So I need to multiply by exactly what's on the bottom except the opposite sign. So negative 2I, whatever I do to the bottom, I got to do to the top. Multiply straight across when it's a fraction. So negative 10I, and then 2 times 2, or 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, and I times I is I squared. All right, the I squared is a negative 1, okay? You just remember, repeat, write that down, write down our little pattern that we have, okay? If you have to keep writing it, keep writing it, just so that way you have it and can remember it. So I'm going to end up with negative 10I over negative 4 times negative 1 is going to be 4. Now, I need to go ahead and simplify this, okay? I cannot leave it that way. So I need to find and make sure that this is in simplest form. All right? So a number that goes into 10 that also goes into 4 is 2. They both have a common factor of 2. So if I divide 10 by 2, so all I'm going to do is divide this by 2, and I'm going to divide this by 2. If I divide 10 by 2, I'm getting negative 5i. Divide 4 by 2, I'm getting 2. And that is my answer. Now, let's go to 3 minus 2i over 3i. So I'm going to multiply by what's on the bottom, but the opposite sign. Whatever I do on bottom, I have to do on top. Now, remember when we were multiplying, we had to distribute everything? This is just like the 3 minus 2i being in parentheses. I'm going to have to multiply that 3, or negative 3i, to everything, all right? So 3 times negative 3i is negative 9i. Negative 2i times negative 3i is a positive 6i squared. All right? Now, 3i times negative 3i is negative 9i squared. All right, I need to change these negative i's. I need to change these I squareds. And I squareds are a negative 1, all right? So I have negative 9i, and then 6 times a negative 1 is a negative 6, and then negative 9 times a negative 1 is a 9. Okay? Now then, what I need to do is I need to simplify this, all right? So I'm going to separate these apart. It's exactly the same, but I'm just going to take them apart. So negative 9i over 9 minus 6 over 9, okay? And then I'm going to take and simplify. All right. Now remember, my whole number still needs to come first, or my real number still needs to come first, which is going to be this because it does not have an I attached to it. So I'm going to have 6 over 9 to come first. So 6 over 9 simplified. I know I can divide this by 3, and I can divide this by 3. So I'm going to end up with negative 2 over 3. Now, negative 9 divided by 9 is 1. So I'm left with positive 1 over 1i. Or I could just say I have negative 2 over 3 plus I. And that will be my answer. Sorry, negative, because that's a negative divided by a positive. So minus on those. Because negative 9 divided by a positive 9 is a negative 1. And that is my answer for that one. Okay, I want you to try the next two. And then pause the video, try them. And then once you finish, see if you get the same answer that I do. All right? All right, so for the first one, I'm going to multiply by what's on bottom, but opposite sign. Okay? So 6 times negative 4, negative 24i.
Coach Steele, please call Miss Ware. Coach Steele, please call Miss Ware.
Then 4 times a negative 4, so negative 16, and then I times I is I squared. All right, I need to get rid of the I squared, which is a negative 1. So I have negative 24i. And then negative 16 times negative 1 is a positive 16. And then I need to simplify. Well, I know that the factors of 24 and the factors of 16 have one in common, which is 4. I can divide both of those by 4. So 24 divided by 4 is going to be negative 6i. And then, actually 8 can be a factor of both of those, because then we'll have to go even lower. So 8 and 8. All right, so 24 divided by 8 is 3, negative 3i, and 16 divided by 8 is 2. All right, so that's the answer for that one. All right, now the next one. Multiply by the opposite that's on the bottom. And remember, I need to distribute the 2 to both things. It's on the top there. So, 2 or negative 2 times 5 is negative 10i. Negative 2 times negative 7 is a positive 14i squared. And then negative 2 times 2 is 4i squared. That should be negative 4i squared. All right. This is a negative 1, and this is a negative 1. All right. So now we end up with negative 10i, and then 14 times a negative 1 is a negative 14 over, and then a negative 4 times a negative 1 is 4. Now I'm going to separate these two. So I'm going to end up with negative 10i over 4 minus 14 over 4. Again, I want my whole number to come, or my real number to come first. So 14 over 4, simplified. I know that 2 will go into both of those. So this is going to give me 7 over 2. And then I'm going to subtract 10i over 4. Now I can simplify 10 over 4. 2 will go into both of those, so I'm going to end up with 7 over 2 minus 5i over 2. Let me erase these extra little dots that's going on there. And that will be my answer for this one. This should be negative because it is a subtraction sign out front. So that should be a negative 7/2 minus the 5i over 2. All right, if you have any questions about that, ask me in class. It's the same thing we've been doing. Just take your time with it and all. All right, let's go to the next page. So to make the I cancel out, to have the denominator in this problem, we must multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate. All right? So it is this word right here. I'm going to do it in green instead of blue. This word right here just means just the opposite. So you want to make a note of that somewhere, okay? All right. So the conjugate of A plus BI is A minus BI. So if you look at that, then you can see the difference in the two. So it's going to be the plus and the minus, the sign in the middle, all right? You're only changing the sign of the imaginary part. You're not changing the sign of the real number. So the conjugate of 5 plus 6i is 5 minus 6i. So all I changed was that right there. I did not change the sign in front of my 5. So let me give you one to practice. If I have 2 minus 3i, I'm going to give you just a second to see if you can find the conjugate and what you're going to multiply by. I'm going to multiply by 2 plus 3i. So that's the difference. Now, the reason we're doing this is because our denominator is a little bit bigger. So let's go ahead and do these three. You're going to have to take and multiply by what's on the bottom. So we keep the 5 because it's our whole number. We change this sign, so it's going to end up being negative 6i and negative 6i. The reason being is that is a perfect square. Remember when we did difference of squares in the factoring? That means we're going to only end up with two numbers when we FOIL it or we box it out, okay, or we do the box method. So I'm going to FOIL. just like taking and having parentheses around all this. Okay? And I'm going to do 5 times 5 is 25. Let me make this a little bit lower so that way you can see what's on top as well. So I'm doing the bottom first. So 25, and then 5 times negative 6i is negative 30i. Positive 6i times a positive 5 is a positive 30i, and then 6 times 6 is a negative 36i squared. Now, as you can tell right here, those two are going to cancel each other out because I have a positive 30i and I have a negative 30i. So those are not even going to be there in just a moment, okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing with the top. So 2i times 5 is 10i. 2i times negative 6i is negative 12i squared. Negative 6 times 5 is negative 30. And then negative 6 times 6 is negative 36i. Now, you won't always have something on the top that's going to cancel out. That is fine. But I need to go ahead and get rid of those I squareds. We know that I squared is a negative 1. Okay? So we're going to end up with 10i, and then negative 12 times negative 1 is a positive 12, minus 30, and then minus 36i. Now, if you combine the 10 and the 36 first, that's fine. That does not bother me. All right. Then we're going to have 25 times a negative, or then negative 36 times negative 1 equals a positive 36. All right. Combine like terms. So 10i and negative 36i. So we end up with negative 26i. And then 12 minus 30 is going to be negative 28. Sorry, negative 18. Negative 18. All right. And then 25 plus 31 is going to be 61. Okay, now if you can simplify this, go ahead. But that's going to be the smallest that you can go with it. You're not going to be able to make it any smaller, so that will be your answer right there. So that is going to be my final answer. Okay? All right. So now let's go ahead, and I'm going to erase this. If you need to get the answer to this, just pause it. I'm going to go ahead and erase it so I have room for the next one. All right, so this one I'm going to multiply by 4 minus 3i, 4 minus 3i. Now, 4 times 4 on the bottom, 16. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12i. Positive 3 times positive 4 is plus 12i. And then 3i times negative 3i is a negative 9i squared. All right, the top one, 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6i. Negative 4 times 4 is a negative 16i. And then negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12i squared. All right, if you want to combine like terms, you can go ahead right here. If you want to actually take and go ahead and get rid of the negative or the I squareds, you can do that as well. So I'm going to combine these this time for those that are doing that. So I end up with 8, and then negative 6 minus 16 is a negative 22i, and then plus, we know this is negative 1, so I'm going to go ahead and do that in one step as well. Negative 1 times a positive 12 gives us a negative 12. All right. Then we have 16. We know that these two are going to cancel out. And then this is a negative 1. So negative 9 times negative 1 is plus 9. All right, combine like terms. So we have 8 minus 12 is negative 4 minus 22i over 16 plus 9 is 25. And that is going to be my answer. I can't simplify that anymore, so there's no point in breaking it apart to see if I can. All right, go ahead and get that work down. I will leave it up here for just a minute while I get ready to do this one. All right, so I'm going to multiply by 2 plus 5i. 2 plus 5i. All right, so my numerator is going to be 2 times 1, which is 2. 1 times 5i, which is plus 5i. Negative 2i times 2 is negative 4i. And then negative 2 times 5 is a negative 10i squared. Okay? Now FOIL it out on the bottom, or do the box method on the bottom. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times positive 5 is positive 10i. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10i. And then negative 5 times 5 is a negative 25i squared. All right, I'm going to go ahead and erase this side over here. That should have been enough time. If you still need it, pause it and get the answer for that one. All right, so I'm going to combine like terms, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these at the same time, okay? Because I already know what those are. So I have 5i plus 4i, and I'm going to leave the 1 in front for those that need to see that place value. And then negative 10 times negative 1 is a positive 10. And that's going to be over 4. My 10s are going to cancel. And then negative 25 times negative 1 is positive 25. All right, I'm going to combine like terms one more time. So 10 plus 2 is 12. There's nothing to combine with the I, so 1i or I. And then 4 plus 25 is 29. And that is my answer for that one. Now, again, if you have any questions or concerns about this in class, save them for class, ask me. We will go over this. You will have plenty of practice, so that way it will help you. Now, I suggest just practice looking over this, using this as much as possible, and that's what's going to benefit you.